Murderzine contains adult themes and violence. Discretion is strongly advised. Episode 9. The Murder of the Village King, Maxwell Bodenheim. The story of Maxwell Bodenheim ends where so many desperate stories did in the 1950s New York, in a squalid, unheated room a few blocks from the Bowery. On the afternoon of February 7th, 1954, Albert Luck, the operator of a rooming house at 97 3rd Avenue, grew concerned. The tenant on the 5th floor, a dishwasher named Harold Weinberg, was behind on his $2.50 weekly rent. Luck climbed the 4 flights of stairs to find the door padlocked from the outside. He knocked, but there was no answer. Peering through a crack in the door panel, he saw 2 motionless figures inside. Sensing something was gravely wrong, he retrieved a hacksaw from the basement, returned, and methodically sawed through the hasp of the padlock. The scene that confronted him was one of brutal, silent violence. On the floor lay the body of a man in ragged clothes. On a nearby cot, a woman was sprawled face down. The man was Maxwell Bodenheim, once one of America's most famous poets. He was 61 years old. His pockets had been turned inside out. Placed neatly on his chest, covering a fatal .22 caliber bullet wound, was a paperback copy of Rachel Carson's lyrical bestseller, The Sea Around Us. The woman on the cot was his third wife, Ruth Fagan, age 35. She had been beaten beyond recognition, her head described as one mass of pulp, and stabbed deeply in the back. In a corner of the room leaned a painted cardboard sign, a prop from Bodenheim's final years spent begging on the streets. It read, simply, "I am blind." How did the man once hailed as a genius, the so-called king of Greenwich Village bohemians, come to this end? His journey began half a century earlier, in a world far removed from the flophouse on 3rd Avenue. Maxwell Bodenheim was born in Hermanville, Mississippi, in 1892, the son of Jewish immigrants. Around 1900, the family moved north to Chicago. But from a young age, Maxwell was a rebel. He was dismissed from high school and soon after enlisted in the U.S. Army, where his defiance landed him in a military prison for a year for desertion. When he was released, he didn't go home. Instead, he became a wanderer, drifting across the country, falling in with migrant workers and petty criminals. By the time he returned to Chicago in 1912, he had forged a new identity, the artist as an outcast, a role he would play for the rest of his life. He arrived at the perfect moment. The city was in the midst of a literary boom known as the Chicago Renaissance. Bodenheim began submitting poems to Harriet Monroe's influential magazine, Poetry, and in 1914 she published his work, launching his career. It was in Chicago that he met Ben Hecht, a brilliant newspaperman who would become his greatest friend and fiercest rival. Together, they were the twin terrors of the city's bohemian scene, collaborating on plays and co-founding the short-lived Chicago Literary Times. But their friendship was too volatile to last. They eventually turned on each other, satirizing one another in their novels. Hecht, the pragmatist, would go on to a lucrative career as a Hollywood screenwriter. Bodenheim, temperamentally incapable of compromise, would see his own career burn out. He became, as one critic later wrote, a ghost of the jazz age. In the 1920s, Bodenheim moved to New York and found his kingdom in Greenwich Village. Here, his fame exploded. The press crowned him the king of Greenwich Village bohemians. His poetry readings in tiny candlelit rooms were legendary, packed with adoring women drawn to his persona as a sensitive yet dangerous artist. Ben Hecht described him as a golden-haired youth with pale eyes and the look of a pensive Christ. His fame was built as much on scandal as on literary merit. He was a notorious womanizer, and his affairs often ended in public tragedy. 1928 was particularly disastrous in Bodenheim's orbit. In February of that year, 22-year-old Amy Cortez, a rumored lover of Bodenheim's, was found dead by her neighbors. She had committed suicide by turning on the gas of her stove and died while gazing at a portrait of Bodenheim. In July, 28-year-old Virginia Drew committed suicide by jumping into the Hudson River after Bodenheim had ridiculed her literary ambition, calling her poem sentimental slush. Virginia's death was a huge scandal in the papers, with rumors of foul play and a suicide pact between the two making headlines. Her father, Eugene Drew, was quoted as saying, "While we cannot hold this individual legally responsible, we do hold him morally responsible, and we feel it our duty to aid and protect other young girls from him." Indeed, a few weeks earlier, 19-year-old Gladys Loeb had been found in her room, also with the gas jets turned on, clutching a photograph of Bodenheim and shrieking that she loved only him. She was found in time to save her life. Bodenheim had reportedly told her that she showed little promise and advised her to give up the idea of writing. The following month, on August 25, 1928, a subway train derailed near Times Square, killing 16 people. One of the victims was a young woman named Dorothy Dear. She was believed to have been on her way to visit Bodenheim. Among her effects, investigators found a score of salacious love letters from him, a detail the tabloids eagerly printed, cementing his reputation as a dangerous Don Juan. Behind the scandals, however, was a writer of incredible energy. Between 1918 and the mid-1930s, Bodenheim published 10 volumes of poetry and 13 novels. His early poems, praised by contemporaries like Carl Sandburg and William Carlos Williams, were noted for their sharp, unusual imagery and experimental style. Williams, one of the keenest observers of his work and character, dubbed him an Isaiah of the butterflies, a prophet of things delicate, beautiful, and ephemeral. Bodenheim was a key figure in the modernist movement, published in influential anthologies like Others, an anthology of the new verse alongside T.S. Eliot, Wallace Stevens, and Marianne Moore. His novels were more commercial and often more controversial. They consistently explored themes of rebellion against social and parental authority. His first novel, Blackguard, was semi-autobiographical, telling the story of a young poet returning from the army who clashes with his parents' conventional values. He showed a particular sympathy for his female characters, often depicting them as victims of an oppressive society who sought liberation through sexuality. This was the central theme of his most famous and infamous novel, Replenishing Jessica. Published in 1925, the story of a wealthy young woman's sexual experimentation was a sensation and a scandal for the day. The New York Society for the Suppression of Vice brought obscenity charges against Bodenheim and his publisher, Horace Liveright. The resulting 3-year legal battle became a landmark case for freedom of expression. The scandal sold thousands of books and solidified Bodenheim's reputation as a rebel, but it also typed him as a provocateur, a label that would damage his literary credibility in the long run. He followed it with other starkly realistic city novels. Ninth Avenue tackled the then taboo subject of an interracial relationship, while Georgie May offered a bleak, compassionate portrait of a Memphis prostitute's tragic life and eventual suicide. As the Great Depression took hold, his fiction became more political. Novels like Run Sheep Run and Slow Vision grappled with mass unemployment, police brutality, and the failures of capitalism, suggesting that communism might offer an alternative. His personal life was just as turbulent as his fiction. He married 3 times. His first wife, Minna Shine, was the muse for his first book of poetry, Minna and Myself. They had a son, Solbert, but Bodenheim's constant infidelities tore the marriage apart after 20 years. His second wife, Grace Finan, provided a measure of stability, but she died of cancer in 1950. Her death was a devastating blow, sending him into a final irreversible spiral. The decline had begun years earlier. The Great Depression hit his finances hard. By the late 1930s, the king of Greenwich Village was already panhandling to survive. After Grace's death, his alcoholism became a consuming disease. He was in and out of the alcoholic ward at Bellevue Hospital. He slept in gutters, on park benches, and in subway cars. His literary career became a tool for survival. He was a fixture in Washington Square Park selling handwritten poems for 25 cents. In the same bars where he was once a celebrated figure, he now offered to write a poem in exchange for a drink. In 1952, he married for the 3rd and final time. Ruth Fagan was nearly 30 years his junior, and she joined him in his derelict existence. They were a familiar, pitiable pair on the streets of the village. Accounts of who she was before she met him are contradictory. Some say she was an honor graduate from the University of Michigan and a journalist. Others claim she was a prostitute. Her own story was lost, subsumed by his. Their life together was one of shared misery, reportedly marked by violence, but also by a deep, dysfunctional bond. It was this desperate poverty that led them to Harold Weinberg. The 25-year-old dishwasher was a former mental patient with a criminal record. He befriended the couple on the street and offered them a place to sleep in his room, an act of charity that proved fatal. The relationship was a volatile triangle, fueled by Weinberg's obsession with Ruth. Tensions had already erupted in public. Just a week before the murders, in a 6th Avenue cafeteria, Bodenheim had grabbed a knife and threatened Weinberg to leave Ruth alone, but the couple was homeless. They had nowhere else to go. Their poverty trapped them with the man who would kill them. According to Weinberg's confession, on the night of February 6th, he and Ruth were having sex together while an intoxicated Bodenheim slept nearby. When Bodenheim awoke and confronted him, a fight broke out. Weinberg shot the poet in the chest with a revolver. He then turned on Ruth, who was furiously pounding on his back and clawing at his face. He proceeded to beat her savagely before grabbing a nearby knife and stabbing her to death. The manhunt for Harold Weinberg was swift. The police quickly identified him as the prime suspect, and his name was known throughout the village haunts where the Bodenheims had spent their final days. The search did not last long. On Wednesday, February 10th, just 3 days after the bodies were discovered, police captured Weinberg. He was arrested and quickly confessed to the double homicide. His court appearance was a bizarre spectacle. He entered the courtroom singing the Star-Spangled Banner. Then he shouted a justification that perfectly captured the paranoid spirit of the McCarthy era. "I ought to get a medal," he declared. "I killed 2 communists." The court was not swayed. Weinberg was judged to be criminally insane and was committed to the Matewan State Hospital for the criminally insane. He would never stand trial for the murders. In the aftermath, Maxwell Bodenheim's legacy was sealed not by his literary work, but by the sensationalism of his life and death. A ghost-written, tabloid-style memoir was rushed into print just months after the murders. His old friend, Ben Hecht, wrote a play about his life, Winkelberg, an affectionate but tragic portrait that emphasized the drama of his fall. These works created a powerful and enduring myth of the drunken, tragic king of Bohemia, a narrative so compelling it has almost completely eclipsed his art. His books are now almost entirely out of print. He is a writer who is famous for his life, not for his work. His ultimate legacy is that of a cautionary tale. He was a writer of genuine talent, a man praised as a genius by the founders of American modernism. But his personal demons, his inability to compromise, and a cultural landscape that shifted beneath his feet all conspired against him. He became an anachronism, a ghost of a bygone era. The sensational story of his life, a life that ultimately became his most famous and most tragic creation, consumed everything else. You have been watching a Murderzine production. Please like and subscribe to see more true crime tales inspired by my personal collection of detective magazines. If you'd like to see a case featured on Murderzine, drop it in the comments or visit murderzine.com for our links and contact information.